So I came across this really interesting interview of Neil Bush. Did you know that there might be a good Bush out of the Bush family, like one that's kind of reasonable and doesn't have a warmongery foreign policy? This we just have to show this to you. So Neil Bush is the one that's not in politics. He's one of the many Bush children. I think he's the like fourth out of six kids, and he didn't get into politics at all. He had a bit of a scandal, business scandal in his younger years, and then but he's really just sort of that brought shame to the Bush family, some sort of scandal, and then he's just continued on with his business ventures. And he sat down with Li Jinjing, who we've had on this show before. She's a reporter for China, and she interviewed Neil Bush while he was in China. He was at the 2024 World Manufacturing Convention. Again, he's a businessman. He was in China's Anhui province. This was published just a couple of weeks ago. Gotta show you the things that Neil Bush says when it comes to China and the United States' attitudes on China and China's attitude about the United States. He says 90% of the people from the political establishment who hears what he has to say would totally disagree with him. But this is his, I think, completely reasonable stance. Watch this.
And it's been a remarkable thing to witness China's rise from a very poor bicycling country to a country now that is the leading deployer of electric vehicles on the streets, or, where there's so much prosperity that was unimaginable 50 years ago when I first came here. And so it's been really wonderful for me to witness firsthand, and I've come to the conclusion, and most Americans probably can't even tolerate that I will say this, but that the Chinese system has worked for China. Chinese system has been so beneficial to hundreds of millions of people whose prospects for prosperity were zero back 50 years ago, or very limited under the old system. And so with the opening, with the US-China bilateral trade, and with the global trade, with globalization, China has risen. And so I come back for business. I come back to promote my father's long-standing legacy interests in having respectful dialogue, in having better understanding, in finding ways to collaborate on major issues. When I wear the business hat and when I work kind of on behalf of my father's legacy interests, it brings me back frequently. This is my sixth trip to China this year, for example. Have you ever heard of the book Destined for War? It's a book by a professor from Harvard who did a study of 16 cases where an established power like the United States, the strongest power, faces a rising power. In today's world, China is a rising power. And in 12 of the 16 cases, it ended up in war. This is over the past 600 years. It ended up in war. And the reason that a rising power, established power, end up in war is because the established power feels threatened by the rise. And and they make up these claims that the rising power wants to take over and be the most powerful force on the earth, or the rising power is going to take over my economy, or the rising power, you know what I mean? They come up with false narratives. There are many false narratives being planted right now, and I think it's a directly related to China's rise and the perceived threat of that rise to our standard of living and to our way of life and to our national security. I don't believe that the rise represents a threat to America. So I'm in a different camp than 90% of the American people right now. And I agree with you that if more people could come, they could make their own judgment and not listen to the propaganda and the demagoguery of the political elite in America that make China out to be some kind of devil and enemy, and
Yeah. What a main drive for you to continue to work and build connections between China and America?
I'm trying my best. It's a very lonely, very, very lonely. No, the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations is run by a guy that's a fluent Chinese speaker. He worked in China for the U.S. State Department for a long time. He has the same sensibility that my father had about, establishing dialogue. So we host dialogue we have a party to party where a CPC group has a meeting with Republicans and Democrats. So we host military to military, conversations, kind of track two type dialogue. We have a conference every once in a while. So in the spirit of George H.W. Bush, we try to bring people together. And it's true that if you sit in a room with somebody and you look them eye to eye and you listen respectfully, you can't help but be empathetic or, learn from and lowers tensions. It creates kind of an opportunity for working together. And so we need way more of that, people to people, government to government, business to business. We need way more interactions between both sides to lower the distrust and the fear.
We're here at the World Manufacturing Convention.
Yes.
What's your perspective? What's your vision for the future of this manufacturing convention? Do you see that the Europe, China, North America, Australia, we can all work together?
I hope so. Yeah, I'm not a manufacturing expert. I'm not an economist. But I do believe that there's going to be growing pressure on economies for economies to be more efficient. The Chinese are going to suffer from a population decrease, and there's going to be a bunch of old people retiring. And so what kind of productivity is going to come to support, the retirement of these large populations? We need, and not just China, but globally, there needs to be an increase in manufacturing efficiencies.
So interesting. And if you paid attention to this is, so again, Neil Bush is not a politician. He's a businessman. And this is exactly why I think we're never going to war with China. I know there's a lot of chatter about it in the political class, but they are so disconnected from the business establishment. And that is what Neil Bush is a part of. So he might not be part of the political establishment, but he's certainly a part of the business establishment. And you see what he's even saying is that, some of the people that are involved in his foundation speak Chinese fluently. He's been to China boatloads of times. And that is really typical for the American business class. And the American business class ultimately runs the political class. So the political class can say whatever they want, but at the end of the day, they need donors. At the end of the day, they're going to do what's best for the business class because they don't want a bunch of American jobs to be lost, which would be on them. And so they're going to be doing whatever the business class wants. And the business class wants nothing to do with war with China. They're making so much money on their partnerships with China, either manufacturing in China, and they don't want to lose that, although that is dwindling. Manufacturing is moving to other countries. But China has 1.5 billion people. That is a market you could sell to. And even though these businesses are required by Chinese law to partner with another Chinese business, so it's owned primarily by a Chinese business, they still are making, they figure this out and they do the math and they say, look, getting 49% of the market share off of 1.5 billion people is still, half of that. So you're looking at what, 750 million people, 750,000 750,000 million. No. Okay. Sorry, guys. 750 million people. That number is still, that's gargantuan compared to the United States population. We're 330 million people. So they do the math and they think it's still worth it for a business to go into China and to be able to make half off of 1.5 billion people, or a little bit more than 1.5 billion people. And that's worth it to them for businesses to have that market share. So they're not going to want to go to war with China. They don't like the idea of tariffs with China because that affects American companies. These American companies are manufacturing in China. They're exporting from China. They don't want any of that. They don't want to go to war with China and have a complete blockade. They don't want there to be any aggressions. They're not interested in this. And Neil Bush, I think, even though I think him being a businessman has, at least when it comes to China. Now, I don't know about all of his other foreign policy. Maybe he's like all the rest of the Bushes. But in this particular instance with China, he takes on that business perspective. And I think that's the reality perspective. I agree with him, but I also think it's the reality that there is what he says about China. Does China really want to be aggressive towards the United States? Should the United States be going to war with China? Should we be, all of these things? This is just nonsensical. The entire interview, if you want to watch it, Li Jinjing has the interview up. It's about 15 minutes long. We only showed you about 5 minutes of it. But the whole thing is really interesting to get that perspective, I think, of the business class and why we should never really fear this idea that we're going to war with China. It's very different than Russia. We don't have these types of business relationships with Russia. So going to war with Russia and sanctioning Russia and cutting off Russia, that was able to be done because there just wasn't that large. There were Western companies operating in Russia, some brands, stores. But for the most part, there wasn't really integrated and extensive business opportunities for Americans in Russia like there are in China. And we're just so I don't think I see war on the horizon. I think I agree with Bush when he says in the interview that he doesn't think, yes, okay, things could get worse with China, but he doesn't think they will. I agree with that sentiment. I don't think China's a worry for us. I don't think there is going to be war with China. I think also Taiwan realizes it's not in their best interest because China's just right there and they can blockade them. They could send missiles over if they really wanted to. I mean, there's a lot that, but China doesn't have any interest in doing that militarily either, bringing Taiwan back militarily. But it's just a very interesting perspective, an interesting perspective. Really, what is the business class thinking? And that's really what it always comes down to. Where is the interest? Where is the business interest? And in the case of China, I think the military industrial complex is smaller than the business complex in this particular case. So the business complex, they're going to win when it comes to influencing the policy towards China. So something really interesting to think about. But the whole interview, we will put the link down below in the comments, and you can watch that entire 15-minute video with Li Jinjing. Everybody's talking about those weight loss injections because the results are so dramatic and they work by lowering your blood sugar and reducing your appetite. But what if you need to lose weight, but you don't have the money for the shots or you don't like weekly shots? Well, that's why doctors created a weight loss supplement called Lean, and the results are remarkable. The studied ingredients in Lean have been shown to lower your blood sugar, burn fat by converting it into energy, and curb your appetite and cravings so you're not as hungry. But listen, Lean is not for the casual dieter with only a few pounds to lose. The doctors at Brickhouse Nutrition created Lean for frustrated dieters with 10 or more pounds to lose. So let's get you started with 15% off and free rush shipping so you can add Lean to your healthy diet and exercise plan. Just visit takelean.com, enter Kim15 for your discount. That's promo code Kim15 at takelean.com. Thank you so much for watching. This was just a clip from the longer, larger show that you can catch Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. That'll route you to the platform where you need to be in order to get the full uncensored show every Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Click on that link, watch the full interview. See you there.